When you hear the phrase role-playing game, what comes to mind? A gray-bearded wizard throwing balls of fire at an enormous dragon? A red-skinned descendant of demons stalking through the shadows of a temple with a plan to steal the sacred golden idol on the altar without alerting the guards? 4 children and a goat man on the road to deliver presents from Christmas Odin to Krishna incarnated in a talking tiger? Chances are good that you think of one name when you hear role-playing game: Dungeons and Dragons. D&D has been around in one form or another for nearly 50 years now. Generations have grown up on it, either directly as gamers or indirectly through the influence it's had on people and media. RPGs can be a lot of fun. They can be frameworks to help a group tell a collaborative story. They can be escapes from the mundanity of daily life, power fantasies where good triumphs over evil, or maybe where you can indulge in some vices rather than upholding virtue. But what if you don't want to play in a fantasy setting with elves and dragons? Maybe you've played D&D and found it hard to enjoy for some reason, like the rules just weren't clicking, or you couldn't figure out how to play the character you wanted to play. Increasingly, people who played as children are coming back to the table and don't know what's out there. If you're watching this video, you probably already know what a role-playing game is. If there's enough interest in the topic, what is a TTRPG, let me know in the comments for a future topic. Point is, there are a lot of reasons why you might want to know what else is out there. The good news is we're in a tabletop gaming renaissance. The advent of self-publishing, the availability of crowdfunding sites to generate the funds to make new games, and the rising desire of people to connect with one another have carried RPGs on a veritable tidal wave of new and sometimes remastered content. D&D is the most well-known RPG in many parts of the world, but it's the tip of the iceberg in terms of what you can play. In this series, I want to highlight other games, give you an idea of what they're about and what you can expect from them, and hopefully help you find just the right game for you and your group to play. For this first video, let's talk about something basic. Literally basic in this case. Let's talk about Labyrinth Lord, written and edited by Daniel Proctor, published by Goblinoid Games. By 1980, D&D had been around for about 8 years from its first publication. Tactical Studies Rules, aka TSR Hobbies, the original D&D publisher founded by Gary Gygax and Don Kay, had revised the rules and wanted to publish an updated version. Tom Moldvay and David Zeb Cook produced the basic and expert sets, known together as the BX edition. Labyrinth Lord starts from this version and expands from there. It's mostly compatible with adventures written for the BX edition, but there are a few relatively minor differences. LL states in the foreword that the game isn't new or innovative, but written as a kind of emulator for content that's out of print. It exists to complement the work that came before it, and bring the feel of a classic to a new audience, as well as keeping the flame alive for those who still carry a torch for the original. If you're coming to LL from D&D 5e, you'll hear some terms that are familiar, but there's a world of difference underneath. For example, in LL, as in basic D&D before, there are less classes, and 3 of them are also your race. This is a concept now called race as class. If you're playing a dwarf, that's your class, an especially hardy fighter type, who has several advantages when underground. If you're playing an elf, you're not then choosing to be a cleric or a rogue. No, every adventuring elf is a combination of a fighter and a wizard. If you're playing a halfling, you're a lucky little sneak who happens to be short and usually barefoot. These 3, collectively referred to as demi-humans, also have a different character level maximum than human player characters, who choose from fighter, cleric, thief, or magic user, aka wizard. If this is throwing you off, wait until we get to saving throws. Keep in mind that LL does have an advanced book that makes the game resemble the first edition of Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, switching from races class to a slightly more familiar race-class combination format, but basic LL is emulating basic D&D, not the advanced game. LL uses the same dice set as D&D, the D4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 20, and 100. Unlike 5e, players made a lot more use of percentile rolls back in the earlier editions, especially the Thief class, and this is true in LL. Attributes are unchanged in terms of what they represent, so you've got strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. There are a few assumptions made in more recent games than there are here. For instance, you might not be literate if you have a lower intelligence score, even in your native language. However, there's an additional consideration: the prime requisites. You get a bump to your experience point gain if you've got a high score in the attribute most important to your class. You're playing a fighter with low strength? Get ready to advance in character levels slower than the rest of your party. Oh, and how do you generate abilities for new character? You roll 3d6 in order. Or you roll 46 and drop the lowest, or roll a few stat arrays and pick the one you like best. But in keeping with the original method, try a game where everyone goes with the 3d6 approach. You might be surprised how playing around with the results can be fun. Let's talk now about skills. Okay, moving on. No, seriously, LL, like the game it emulates, has no skills. The advanced edition of D&D added the concept of non-weapon proficiencies in 2nd edition to cover the concept of creative talents, skilled labor, and social adeptness. The advice to players back in the day regarding what your character knew or could do outside of combat was to consider the character's backstory, even down to declaring it the first time you needed to refer to their personal history. There are 2 social topics where LL provides mechanics: minions and morale, which, now that I think about it, sounds like an interesting name for a minis wargame. In combat, casualties can take a psychological toll on the NPCs in a fight. You can and often will find that monsters give up or try to flee when a fight turns against them, depending on their morale value. On the other side of the coin are NPCs doing your bidding, which can include retainers or followers. Retainers are NPCs you hire to do your manual labor. This means carrying your treasure or your torches, cooking your meals, or cleaning your gear. It doesn't usually mean fighting for you. If retainers were willing to fight monsters, they'd be adventurers on their own. Grow your character up to 9th level, however, and you achieve the right reserved for the greatest of champions, building a stronghold and attracting followers. A stronghold is a keep, tower, or guild house that can generate some resources for you. Perhaps most importantly, the stronghold provides a location where those who've heard of your daring deeds and mighty prowess can gather to learn from you as apprentices or minions. Followers have class levels and will fight for you, though they're usually just getting started, so they're not going to stand on the forefront alongside you. You won't be choosing good or evil for character alignment, as there are only 3 in LL: lawful, neutral, and chaotic. Good and evil are moral shades you can play with within those ethical boundaries. Further, there's an old concept that still exists here: the alignment language. All lawful beings know a lawful language that can only be understood by other lawful beings. Same for chaotics, same for neutrals. No, I don't know why. No, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Spellcasting doesn't look too different at a glance. There's a list of spells for magic users and elves and another list for clerics. That's where things differ from modern cousins. There's no concept of upcasting with a higher spell level slot to get a bigger effect. There are different versions of spells for that, like Cure Light Wounds, Cure Serious Wounds, etc. If you want to cast a bigger version, you memorize the bigger version. Speaking of memorization, you're expected to memorize exactly the spells you want available that day. If you want to cast Fireball 3 times, you memorize Fireball 3 times. Every time you cast it, you forget it and have to memorize it again the next day. There's no studying 4 spells and then casting from among them. You have exactly what you studied that morning, and that's all. There are no cantrips, no spells you can cast over and over. A first level magic user has basically 1 spell. Once you cast it, you're out of magic for the day. This disparity flips over time. A high level magic user is a terrifying force of nature, but there also aren't many high level magic users for reasons that are probably becoming obvious. Acting in a combat situation in LL is more like you'd expect from a board game than what you might be used to in modern RPGs. This isn't far off from the truth. Remember that D&D's combat rules were built on a miniature wargaming foundation, and LL emulates those faithfully. By default, each side in a fight gets to do their actions, and then the other side gets to go. If the PCs win initiative, you all move, and then you all shoot your bows, and then you all cast any spells, then you may all make any melee attacks, and then your side's turn is done. In terms of lethality, older games pulled no punches, and neither does LL. When you dropped to 0 hit points, there are no death saves, there's no bleeding out, no unconscious state. Your character dies. Barring some serious magic, that's the end for them. How do you know if you hit? There's a table for that. This is something to consider in almost anything calling itself a retro clone. Older games were almost all full of tables and charts for resolving actions involving chance. You want tables? We got more tables in a furniture store. Tables of tables, come on down. Here's a mind bender for the modern player. Lower armor class numbers are better. A set of leather armor might take your AC down from the starting number of 9 to a 7. Full plate mail might get you down to a 2, which is tough to hit. The really scary monsters, the biggest dragons or demons, AC in the negatives. Good luck, roll high. I mentioned that saving throws would throw you, pun intended. You don't roll a dex save in LL. You roll a save depending on the source of the special attack. Breath weapons, poison or death effects, wands, petrify, or paralyze. And lastly, the generic spell save are your choices. And there's a table for each class giving you your numbers. Every level 4 cleric saves against paralysis the same way, by rolling 14 or higher on a d20 roll. No modifiers unless you've got a magic item that says otherwise. Make a saving throw versus death for me. What do you mean, what kind of death? Instant death. No, it's not a spell. No, it's not coming from a wand. Where's it coming from? From the business end of shut up and roll already. LL includes a pretty good list of monsters in the book. All the basics are here. Skeletons and specters, dragons and demons, giant animals and weird oozes. Want some more charts? LL has several involving monsters, including what treasures they might be protecting, how many of them you find, random encounter tables for the woods or the desert, or even based on how far down in a dungeon you've delved. There's a hefty selection of treasures and magic to find as well. Keep in mind that items with charges turn into fancy junk after you use the last charge. There's almost no concept of this many per day, but more like 6 times ever. The wilderness has plenty of challenges, and cities can be rife with dangers, but the name of the game starts with Labyrinth. Labyrinths are scary places. They're usually underground, full of monsters and deadly traps and confusing layouts. There's rarely anywhere to rest in any safety, because monsters wander around looking for food or treasure or trouble. Dirty, moldy, and dark. Like I said, LL doesn't pull any punches. In their 2009 Holiday Buyer's Guide, The Escapist had this to say: Labyrinth Lord feels like a Vietnam War movie, where the dungeons are dark, wet, and terrifying. Goblins murder all your friends with spiked pit traps and crossbow bolts from the shadows, and you start to develop a 1,000-yard infravision stare from spell shock. In terms of atmosphere, LL is built to support the feel of the role-playing experience from the late 70s or early 80s, but that still covers a lot of ground. Think the stories of Conan, or Elric of Melniboné, or Lankhmar as much as Shannara or Middle-earth. Thematically, there's a lot of room between those extremes. You can be heroes standing for the shining light, or you can be murder hobos out looking for gold and glory. LL and its forebears don't really exist to provide you the tools to tell a story. The origins of D&D are an evolution of wargaming, to which the great Dave Arneson came along to add storytelling elements. The game doesn't tell you how to tell a story, doesn't particularly offer mechanics that hinge on or even directly support storytelling. If you're looking for a storytelling game, what LL provides is a mechanical framework for a fantasy world. It tells you how violence takes place, but doesn't direct you on when. It tells you how you'd go about earning the right to build a fortress, but doesn't tell you why your character would do so. It gives you a plan on how your character grows in power, but not who those people become. LL gives you the framework for a world and then gets out of your way to decide why things happen in it. If you're looking for a modern game system with rules options to make your character uniquely your own, Labyrinth Lord probably isn't the way to go. There's no hand-holding here either. Remember, death in the labyrinth is waiting around every corner, and sometimes with almost no warning at all, and it's unforgiving. Labyrinth Lord is a good option for groups who want to experience or perhaps recapture the feel of one of the earliest game systems in the hobby, and do so on the cheap. You can get a no-art version of the rules for free at goblinoidgames.com. You're missing out on the rather fantastic art, the classic style of the 70s fantasy RPG genre, but you're not getting a demo copy or quick start. It's the complete system otherwise, and is released under the Open Gaming License, so you can make your own derivative works for LL. You can also browse their retro clones of other early games from multiple genres. Their library is also available at Lulu for on-demand printing, or in PDF at DriveThruRPG. German and Italian translations of the rules are also available. I hope you found this somewhat helpful. I intend to give some quick reviews of other games in the future. If there are any games you'd like me to highlight, let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching.